Hi, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Amanda.
and we are serving up.
All that jam. A lighthearted look at the weekend jam bands.
Where we break down the jam scene's biggest stories,
Talk new bands.
upcoming tours,
And show reviews. A little laughing, some hot takes, and an always positive message for the community.
February 13th, 2023.
Welcome back to Valentine's Week episode of All That Jam. How are we doing today, Amanda?
Oh, Kevin, I am great. And you know what's funny is that hadn't even really occurred to me until you just mentioned it. So
You need to go out and get a hub something there, huh?
yeah, we'll have to work on that. But thank you for the reminder, and definitely excited for this week's show.
Yes, it's going to be fantastic. We have our interview with Mike Mullins, who is Mark Mullins from Bonorama and just world-renowned trombone player. His son, Mike, has a band that's a rock and roll band out of New Orleans. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And I'll just mention, Kevin, since a lot of times we chat about shows we went to this last week. Did you watch anything this week? Were you streaming anything? Anything going on?
I saw all four of the Bobby shows. My friend sent me a pass for all 4 days, and last night was fantastic. What did you think, Liz? Did you get to check any of that out last night?
You know, I saw a little bit of it, so I was double streaming. I had the Railroad Earth show on, which I went to on Friday night and did not go last night, but watched it, and then got a tip to pop over to the Capitol Theater show. So I had both going on, and I think that was the finale, right, last night for Bob and friends over there.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. They did four
He,
shows. Yeah,
is there? I don't know what finale means these days because
right.
he could be popping up anywhere, this week.
Does pop up all over now. But well, let's before we get into that. How was Railroad Earth? What are they up
Oh,
to?
it
I
was
mean, God, they've been around forever.
They have been around for a long time, and I know I'm biased, but I have been saying, and I've gotten some agreement on this informally, that especially the second set of Friday night's show is one of the best sets I've ever heard from them, and that is going back over 20 years now of seeing them regularly.
Wow.
Energy, the connection they have with each other right now. Dave Speranza, the new bassist, I think has really brought like a connectivity to them between Mike Robinson, who we'd played with prior, Matt Slocum. They just seem to have a really great thing going on. And, at one point there were double keys, which is not something that I'm used to hearing from them. It was great. I was very, very excited and just really loved what they're up to.
Nice. I guess they're out there touring. I'm hope maybe we need to check out if they're going to be popping up at some festivals or anything. Do you know anything about what they're doing?
Yeah, so they have been on tour. They were on the West Coast, and this next week or so is going to kind of wrap up this leg of this tour. They're going to do some shows in March. They'll be at the Levon Helm Studios and some other great spots, kind of in the Northeast. Right now, I think the festival I know that they've announced is Hog Farm Hideaway out in California, which Cheese I think headlines every year, so they'll
Okay.
be a part of that one. Yeah.
You need to call in some connections. Get somebody on the show from Railroad Earth.
Oh, trust me, Kev, working on it. So everybody just stay tuned out there. Yeah, no, I think it would be great to have them on.
Yes. Let's jump to the goose. Rick and Peter sitting in, and there was Kenny Brooks sat in for on and off for the whole show, who was a Rat Dog sax player, and also they had another keyboard player, Dred Scott, who had played with Kenny Brooks and Jay Lane, I guess, at some point in the past. It was
Yeah.
fantastic. I really, I thought Rick got to sing some, me and my uncle, and a little bit of Franklin's. I think he took a verse. I was impressed. I'm glad to see that Bobby and Phil are sharing him.
Yes. Well, I mean, the memes already abound of the timeshare or custody arrangement that they must have worked out. But, it definitely feels like there is some kind of deep kinship there that to me feels natural between Rich, especially, and the rest of that band. That era of music seems to really speak to him, I guess. I'm not sure, but whatever it is, it's been great to watch.
He's a fan of songwriting. So I see where the attraction is. And I was talking with Rye Storm. We did an after show last night on Wook Plus about it. And we were talking about, that he was a Deadhead. He grew up, him and Peter, I guess, were entrenched in it from a young age. So
it shows. I mean, I think when you live something for that long, and plus the talent and everything else, it feels like something that has been meant to happen for a really long time, which is not always the case when you have sit-ins like that.
Right. It's part of their DNA now. So
yeah.
All right. So let's jump into the
top 3 stories of the week.
All right, Kevin. So, top 3 stories for this week. The Disco Biscuits. I just love them, Kevin. I always have. I love their take on everything. It's very irreverent, right? Always. And so, currently, the Disco Biscuits have opened up voting, which I think this is the first time since 2015 that the Disco Biscuits are going to have a movie night. This is a tradition for them that's set for March 11th during their 3-night run at the Caverns in Tennessee. The Disco Biscuits are giving fans the chance to vote on which movie the group's going to play along to. So voting is open, and here are the choices. So fans can choose between, well, there's 6 films, so I'll just mention a few of them. Labyrinth, which is that cult classic from the 80s. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, so some sci-fi. Fifth Element was another one, which I think is just really fun. So
they had Blade Runner on there too, which is another sci-fi. I voted for Blade Runner.
Nice, you voted. I haven't voted yet, but I would probably vote for Labyrinth, even though the music there is already great. So maybe it should be something else.
I just think Blade Runner would fit in with the Jamtronica, because it's in the future.
Yep. So. Yeah, that dystopian kind of feel to it. Yeah. So, and I think I mentioned voting's open until February 23rd. So the band has at least a week or two to figure out what they're going to do. And the winner will not be announced. So it'll be a night of. All right. So that was our first story here. The second actually connects to a band that we have been fortunate enough to talk to here on All That Jam. Last week, a couple members of Dopapod played for some elementary school students. And I just thought this was like the cutest story, and that we know these guys. So it was Eli, Chuck, and Neil. They visited the elementary school where Chuck's wife, Allison, is a 3rd grade teacher. They performed for students and teachers at the school, taught them about different instruments. They got a kid on stage to play some guitar. I think they did a cover of Black Sabbath, Iron Man. And there's some really good video clips out there also that maybe we can share. So I just thought that was a nice one to talk about today.
Iron Man has to be a pretty easy tune on the guitar. You get the first few drone power chords, It isn't asking somebody to do too much.
Absolutely. And, so that all happened actually about a week or so before they're going to kick off their winter tour dates. That's going to be February 24th through right around March 18th or 20th. And lots of shows, of course, going on, and some other fun stuff too. And then the last one, Kevin, you actually had shared with me, and I hadn't seen this one yet, so I had to put a little ding on my New Jersey girl card. But the Bruce Springsteen fanzine, you had let me know that they, after over 40 years, that the fanzine is shutting down.
Right, Backstreets, right?
Oh, Backstreets, yeah. So editor-in-chief, I guess, shared the news in a letter that he'd been just downhearted and disillusioned after tickets for the upcoming tour topped out at $5,000 because of dynamic pricing.
Right. He said that they couldn't even say that they'd be at every show anymore to do the kind of reporting and in-depth that they did.
That to me is very sad. I mean, this guy has been leading operations there since 1998, right? So just that one person being involved for so long. But he said 6 months after on sales, they have 3-part predicament. So concerts they can barely afford to go to. A lot of their readers can't afford to go. And because of that, their readership has gone down. So you can kind of start to see the spiral effects of this whole ticketing debacle.
Tearing down the whole community's ecosystem there.
That's right. So definitely something that connects to a lot of what we've been talking about lately.
Yeah, but I just hate to think of Bruce doing the money grab like he did. He always seemed like, I mean, I've seen Bruce. I'm not going to throw on a Bruce Springsteen album. It's not something that I just listen to. I saw him. He put on a hell of a show, but just he seems like such a working man, down to earth, his whole persona. But it turns out he's one of the 1%, I guess.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing is, so I feel like for what you would maybe call, a global act, right? Like he is for a long time. I do feel that it was kind of widely recognized that Springsteen had kept his ticket prices significantly lower than what the market could probably bear. But even with that, now here we are for whatever reasons, and that is just not something that a lot of people can handle. I mean, he'll be out here in March, I think, Springsteen, and I took a quick peek at tickets and I just said, "Oh, forget it. That's not going to happen."
All right, so we spoke to Mike Mullins and his band ZITA. This first clip, we're going to get into basically about being a rock band in New Orleans and where you play. He mentions a little bit about tips. So we'll check that out and we'll see you on the other side.
I mean, how does it feel to be there, on the ground in New Orleans, doing something that might be considered a little bit to the side of like you were saying, like the major genres? Do you feel like that's maybe a net positive in some ways because it's a little bit different and unique?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of there's pluses and minuses to it, but we try to stay positive about it generally, but of course you always get the feeling that rock and roll is kind of treated like a forgotten stepchild in New Orleans, which as a rock musician I'll say is true, but you can't, that doesn't take away from the fact that New Orleans has an illustrious music history and that exists in its own right for great reasons. But it's like it also does like benefit us in the sense that like going around all these like major cats in the city like George Porter or Ivan Neville, any of the Nevilles, they listen to our music and they're like, oh, like that's cool shit, because they never heard, I mean, they've obviously heard stuff like it before, but they don't associate that with coming out of New Orleans typically. And so it does make us very proud to be able to say that, like, to be able to kind of not originate but be one of the few doing what we call, quote unquote New Orleans rock and roll.
Now, what clubs are open to you down there? Where do you end up playing rock and roll in New Orleans? Because people go down there, they want to see a jazz band,
Right. Yeah, and it's very true. But I think that even most of the clubs that you'd expect people to see those kinds of bands at are the clubs we're playing. I mean, we're playing at the Howlin' Wolf, we're playing at Tipitina's quite frequently. Like that, Tips love. They're awesome to us, and they're like, yeah, we want to, work with you guys. We want to.
Tips is the navel of the music universe, so
100%. It's like the New Orleans music mecca is what I call it, and it's great. Even but outside of like Live Nation rooms, Tips is by far the place in the city. So.
And it's so cool that the Galactic bought it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to diverge here. I would love to talk to them because they bought it right before quarantine. You couldn't have picked the worst time to buy a club.
It's like I've talked to them briefly about it, and they just kind of, I mean, they're pros, but they keep a kind of positive demeanor about it. But then they weathered the storm, man, and they're doing a great thing now. I mean, I go back there. It's Tipitina's. It's always been great, but I go back there. It's like the best it's ever been. It feels the best it's ever been. Everybody takes care of you. Everybody's happy. Everybody's like feels good about doing their job. There's no like stragglers at a venue like you'll get at other places where, like, you get the sense that people don't want to be there. They're getting undercut on pay or whatever. Like Tips is just through and through. They're doing a great job running it.
Yeah. And I think they did as much as humanly possible during quarantine with the live shows and the benefits and I mean everything. I think they kept as much of a sense of community in a virtual way that you could have, and we all got to participate in that, which being here is something that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So we never try to paint a rosy picture of 2020, but I do think there were opportunities for all of us to feel like, okay, we can support them in this time. Kevin, that first clip, I thought what was interesting about that is just thinking about New Orleans and recognizing that the musical history there is so much more diverse than even we might think it is. So ZITA being the kind of band they are, that there's still, a home for them there. The second clip that we're going to talk about is, I think, a topic that I find endlessly fascinating now that we're a few years out, which is what was that COVID quarantine era like for the band, and some recording that they had been doing. And then also this whole idea of videos connected to it. So let's hear what he had to say about that.
So how was your quarantine? We always get into that.
Yeah, well, we actually wrote and recorded the album in it, so it wasn't too bad. It was our last album that came out, Hardley Alive, is like, we wrote it mostly beforehand, but quarantine was cool because like it was a time where like we got to sit down with each other 3 times a week and just write and like work on stuff and not care about being bound to any other sort of schedule. Like we didn't feel like we have to go at 9, guys. Like I got work in the morning. I gotta, whatever. Like, so I think that it was conducive to the creation of the album 100%.
Cool. So Amanda, do we want to get into process with him at this point, since he's mentioned the album? Like, what is your process of doing an album? Do you walk in with a bunch of songs? Do you walk in with a few sketches and then flesh them out in the studio?
It's very rock and roll and unorganized. It's it's like completely like we just kind of write on the fly. Like if we have an idea in rehearsal, it just we just jam on it, we flesh it out, whatever. Definitely don't go in the studio though until we feel like we have enough in the bag to financially in the bag and musically in the bag to justify going in there and cutting everything at one time, whether or not we're going to release it as an album. For this next project, we really don't know. We're still working on some songs, but we really don't know, like, if we're going to release it as all singles, EPs, album, because singles seems to be the way that a lot of indie bands are doing it nowadays, and it seems to be getting some traction for them. But
I've seen a few bands bust out cassettes recently. They're putting stuff out on cassette.
Cassettes and vinyl. I mean, vinyl's obviously coming back. We're thinking about doing that too. But that's another.
Well, at least for the last year or so, there's just been so much lead time for vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently Adele took all of it when she released her last album. Apparently, like all the vinyl in the world went to press her albums.
There you go.
That would make more sense. Yeah, I have no idea where it went.
I know, right?
You've embraced video, both like the picture, which is more of your standard rock video, hey, we're hanging out in the bar, and then the wife, which is the classic MTV let's tell a crazy story. I love that you embrace that. Can you talk a little bit about that component of what you do?
Yeah, and even going back to what you said about like doing the album and shooting the video versus like touring, I maybe should have answered that question by saying all 3, because I love making the videos. Like those 2, I guess 3 shooting days we had in total to make those 2 videos, because we actually made them on the same property. Like we made them in the same place. But yeah, I'll never forget like any second of those days. I love doing that stuff. I've done like freelance, like just like acting work for friends, and I just love doing that stuff. And I love being able to, like, The Wife was one where that's the first song we wrote together as a band, and it was loosely based on the Canterbury Tales, The Wife of Bath's Tale by Geoffrey Chaucer. And I was like, I read that in high school, and I was very inspired by it. I was like, I was inspired by a lot of old British literature at the time. And I took that and I was like, maybe I can make some sort of like compare. I mean, like I said, it's loosely based, but like when I had written the song and thought of like how I could portray it in my own sense, like how I could portray like a loose interpretation of The Wife of Bath's Tale in my own like eyes, I started getting ideas for like making this like sort of vague antebellum / Victorian era sort of like rock and roll thing. I was like, wait a minute. I was having a lot of ideas like writing the song. So the ideas for the video like came from like just the same places like writing. immediately when I wrote the song. That's when I had a lot of those ideas. But a lot of them also came from our director, Jack Faust. Like he was just is a filmmaker friend of mine, and he has a lot of different talents that. Excuse
Sorry.
me.
Hey, buddy.
Comes in. He's like, I have thoughts on
Puppers.
it.
Puppers is excited.
They're so sweet.
We all have pets, so yeah.
Yeah, I just sort of closed the door. That was my bad. But
My cat likes to sit and cry.
Yeah, right.
As cats tend to do.
It's a lot better than screaming bloody murder. It's always fun when they do that, but that's what you have. That's what you get for having beagles. Anyway, yeah. So we had a great time making the videos, and I think that we plan to make as many as we can going forward.
Really, the videos, if you're hearing this, you need to go over to YouTube, find ZITA, check out their videos. It's so reminiscent of 80s, 90s hair metal kind of video things. I don't want to call them hair metal, but just they've adopted that whole spirit of the rock and roll. And Amanda, what's this last clip going to be?
Yeah, so we also got to talk a little bit about what it's like to be an independent artist right now and some of the benefits that actually brings. Also, we had chatted about a Pelicans game that ZITA had been able to play the halftime show for, and what it was like to be in front of that crowd versus maybe some of the more typical venues that they would play.
Let me ask you this. Do you feel it's better to go at it yourself, put out your albums, do your videos, or to attach with a record company that is going to give you minimal support and take 85% on the back end?
Yeah, I'm indie all day. We've had offers from people who, not from record companies directly, but from people who are associated with record companies. About three deals thrown at us at this point, and it's like, why? Like what? I can do all this stuff on my own. I can like a la carte all of my services that I need to in order to be able to substantially like just sustain a lucrative thing for myself with my own original music. I don't need a record label at this point. And a mentor of mine, Billy O'Connell, he always used to tell me, he's like, the only reason you need a record label in 2020 at the time is world domination. Like you don't like, unless you're Lady Gaga, unless you're Beyonce, like unless you're trying to break into the pop ranks and like be one of the major artists of the day, you don't need a record company, especially if you're just trying to tour and you're just trying to do all this.
I like that. You have your booking agent, you have your publicist, I guess.
Right. I mean, one of the bands that we like look up to the most, it's a modern rock band doing it, touring big time. They actually opened for the Black Crowes on their most recent tour, the Shake Your Moneymaker Part whatever tour. Like they did again, and their team, I talked to the lead singer, his name is Mark LaBelle. He told me their team is like publicist, agent, management. That's it. And they're like they're taking over the rock world with that. So
what's this band's name?
Dirty Honey.
Dirty Honey. I'll have to check that out. Interesting.
Yeah, they're some LA rock guys. They're LA studio guys primarily, but they got together, formed a rock band. I saw them live. That's probably the tightest rock show I've ever seen in my life.
The only other thing I was just curious about is I saw some pictures and that Pelicans game you did. I guess I don't know if it was New Year's or right at the end of the year. That just looked like such a blast. Like, was that big venue like that? How did it feel to be there? Did you all just totally get into it? How's the crowd? Because that's a different kind of feel, I would think, than being at a club or something.
Totally. It was weird because I think that like. We definitely felt like, there's like 10,000 people there because like half the crowd has gone to, whatever, go to the bathroom, get drinks at halftime. And it's like, nobody's really expecting, I don't think anybody was expecting what we did. So like it was very cool to see the reaction of the crowd. Half the crowd is like absolutely jamming out and like out of their seats dancing. And then the other half of the crowd's like, what in the hell? Like, what is this dude doing?
I'm going to get a pretzel.
Yeah. Most people did. And I don't think it hit us like the magnitude of what we actually did until we went till we went back in the dressing room after, and we looked at Twitter, and there was just like a bunch of, there was one dude who was quite obviously had gone to like go get a pretzel or something, and he tweeted like, was that somebody unknowingly doing coke, mic'd up doing coke during the Pelicans halftime show? We like looked at all these tweets that were like, there was like good and bad, and we were like, oh, like, man, this is the first time like we've had this much like random love and hate at the same time. We're like, yeah, okay,
But that's a good thing.
yeah, 100%. That's how it's going to be.
It's so great that he got to play the Pelicans game, and it's so funny that how he says half the people didn't know what the hell was going on and half the people were getting into it. But I guess that's a pretty good margin for an unknown band just showing up.
I think that's a great margin. And I also think that you can maybe tell, this is someone who grew up in the music industry or around it, but also has a really healthy perspective on the reality of what it's like to play in those kinds of venues where people are there for sports or with their family. And so the pictures also tell a great story. And there's plenty of those on their social media of how much fun everybody in the band was having. And I think that's got to be a huge part of it too for them.
Yeah, if the band's having fun, nobody wants to see some sulky guy on stage.
No, we get enough of that, and I won't say what genres, but
Right.
it happens. This was not one of those though.
Right, it happens in real life. So the Super Bowl is going on right now, and you had a great idea about the Super Bowl. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So full disclosure, I was struggling to think of something that I could ask our listeners about. And I think sometimes it's nice to try some different things. So I double checked because I am not a sportsy person. And it is true that the halftime show for the Super Bowl is typically about 12 minutes long. And so I thought, well, I know a band that has jams of all different shapes and sizes. So I checked out some of the best 12-minute Phish jams ever, Kevin. And of course, there are many of them, but it's really interesting to think that every single one of these is about the same length. So that in itself is kind of fun. Going all the way back to 1985. I'll share just a few here for right now, but we'll also mention that I have posted these in a menu format, almost like you're going to a restaurant, on our website. So we'll make sure to share the link out. If nothing else, sometimes as a Phish fan, Kevin, I think it's fun to be reminded of shows that maybe you haven't thought about in a while, or even specific songs from a show. And these are all genres all eras of Phish. So want me to go through a few of these here?
Yeah, throw a few out.
All right. So let's see. We'll just talk about a few. 1988. This is from November 11th, Whipping Post in New Hampshire, coming in at 12 minutes and 14 seconds. So this was a jam that had some really cool kind of spacey vibes going on from Paige and Trey. Almost more Pink Floyd than Allman Brothers like, so a different feel. So that was one of the ones that I found. Let's see, 1994, Possum from Maine, 12 minutes, 20 seconds. This is I think this is definitely a must hear, kind of a darker exploratory jam, has a really good theme and parts, a couple sections that kind of challenge what we think of Possum to be. And I think for that era, also something that maybe hinted at some of the types of jams we'd be used to hearing from them, like just a couple years later. I'll give you two more. There were definitely plenty from the European tours in 97. So one that definitely stood out to me was a Caspian jam. This is June 19th, 97 from Vienna. Really beautiful intro, like 3.5 minute introduction to this song, which in itself is super cool. And then the jam section featured a really good Trey and Paige interplay. And then it's just some variation in the melody, more than I think has become typical there. And last one that I will talk about is 99 Taste from Rochester, almost 13 minutes, so it almost didn't make the cut. But I think the closest thing to a really jammed out version of this song, which we don't typically get, right? That's not necessarily what it's known for, at least kind of before 2017. So they really stretched out Trey's solo. So as you can see here, lots to listen to, and there's way more than that. So we'll make sure to post this link. And if you're into the Phish and you're looking for something different, just listen by timestamp. Maybe that's the new way to do it.
That is, maybe. So that's on www.allthatjampod.com is where you'll be able to find that. You can also find us on social media at All That Jam Pod on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and we'd love if you subscribed. We would love if you liked and followed, left us a review. So, all right. And with that, let us tell you, next week we are going to have the founder of Basin Street Records on. He's going to talk a little bit about the challenges he finds in the recording industry and talks about a few of the artists that he's worked with over the years. So make sure to tune in next week and listen to that. Also, later this week, we have been dropping shorts. And we have Raina Mullen coming up this week talking about fans. We have Gator from Pigeons talking about a band, Infinity Tribe, that's one of his side projects. And we have part 2 of our talk with Spafford, this time Jordan talking about songwriting. So make sure that Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays to check that out. They're short, 5 minutes. You can listen to them while you're waiting to pick your kid up from school or whatever. You got anything else for us?
No, I don't, but I will I will say that the question that I think we posed a week or two ago about, is there actually more going on right now for tours than there used to be, or does it just feel that way, has been coming up in conversation for me a lot. And this idea of, bands dropping 6-8 tour dates at a time versus just that one long tour. It is still a thing, because now what's starting to happen is people have made plans to travel somewhere, but then another 8 dates get released. And now there's some big time, questions is, do I want to do plan A or not?
Why am I going to travel 300 miles now when I can go 50? And I'm stuck with these tickets now.
Well, and so that is becoming like a real situation for people who are able to travel for music, which is obviously, a great thing, but very hard to make those advanced plans. People are doing it and then wondering.
Right. Trey dropped 2 dates, Baltimore and Jersey. And then a couple of days later, a festival was added. I keep watching the Trey dates trying to be the oracle for what the Fish dates are going to be. Because,
Okay, we're going to have to talk about that. Maybe get the Ouija board out.
Right.
For next week.
I believe that it's not going to be Tuesday coming up. I don't think it's going to be tomorrow or whenever everybody's listening. I think it's going to be the Tuesday before Mexico is when they'll drop them. So
yeah,
we will see. All right. Well, Rihanna's coming on. I think my kids want to watch Rihanna there. So
okay, well, I'm about to go to my Fish list personally.
So we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. And remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long. Talk to you soon, Amanda.
Take it easy.